My name is Evelyn Carter, and at 67 years old, I've learned one undeniable truth. The most dangerous predators often bear your last name. They smile at you over dinner, compliment your pie, call you mom, all while calculating exactly what your life is worth. That morning, I was sitting in my favorite rocking chair on the front porch of my colonial-style home in the quaint village of Winslow, Vermont. The breeze carried the scent of crisp leaves, and the maples on our property were putting on their annual show of fiery reds and golden yellows. Tourists came by the hundreds just to see it. But I had the luxury of witnessing it every day for the past 43 years, ever since my late husband, Robert, and I bought the place shortly after we got married. The house looked like something out of a design magazine. White clapboard siding, black shutters, and a cozy interior filled with antique furniture that Robert and I had collected over the decades. There was the grandfather clock passed down from his mother, the Persian rugs we brought back from an anniversary trip to Istanbul, and the mahogany dining set that had hosted 30 family Christmases. Every corner of the house held memories. More importantly, it held treasures. Not just in monetary value, although some pieces were indeed worth a fortune, but in the truest sense, relics of a life lived with love and intention. Which is why the look in my new daughter-in-law Savannah Carter's eyes put me on edge. Savannah was beautiful in the way movie stars are. Flawless skin, honey blonde hair always curled just right, and a body toned to gym perfection. She walked like she owned every room she entered, even if it wasn't hers. From the moment she married my son Daniel, she had a way of making me feel like a guest in my own home. A polite guest, tolerated out of obligation. That morning, she stood in my kitchen, sipping coffee from my favorite blue and white porcelain mug, the one I'd saved from a trip to Paris with Robert. She didn't ask if she could use it. She never asked. She acted like everything under my roof already belonged to her. And perhaps, in her mind, it did. "Morning, Evelyn," she said, flashing that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "You sleep okay?" I nodded and forced a tight-lipped smile. "Well enough. And you?" "Oh, like a baby," she chirped, then turned her attention to her phone, tapping away with those perfectly manicured nails. "Daniel had to run to town. He'll be back before lunch." I said nothing. Daniel used to call me every week. We were close, incredibly close. When his father passed, it was Daniel who stayed up with me that first night, sitting silently on the floor of the bedroom, just holding my hand while I cried. But ever since Savannah came into the picture, things changed. Phone calls became texts. Visits became short. Affection turned into awkward side hugs. I blamed myself at first. Maybe I was too overbearing. Maybe I didn't give him space. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just me. It was her. Savannah had a way of placing invisible wedges where there used to be bonds. Later that afternoon, while Savannah was out at her yoga class and Daniel still hadn't returned from town, I wandered into the sitting room, my sanctuary. It was the coziest spot in the house, with bookshelves stretching floor to ceiling, a fireplace I adored, and photos of my family throughout the years lining the mantel. I reached for the photo of Daniel at age 6, missing his 2 front teeth, and holding up a frog he'd proudly caught in the backyard. But as I lifted the frame, I noticed something odd. The photograph was slightly off-center, like someone had removed it and hastily put it back. Curious, I opened the back of the frame. My breath caught. Behind the photo, there had been a folded sheet of paper, but it was gone. I didn't scream, I didn't panic. I just stood there, still as stone, the weight of that absence far heavier than the frame in my hands. That paper had held the original appraisal for a collection of rare stamps Robert's father had passed down. They were kept in a locked box in the upstairs study, a box only I had the key to, or so I thought. My hand trembled slightly as I set the photo back in place. I moved quickly but quietly through the house, up the creaking stairs, and down the hall to the study. I unlocked the cabinet and pulled out the stamp box. Still locked, still dusty. But something in me didn't believe the surface. That evening, over dinner, I watched Savannah carefully. She chatted breezily about a new Pilates instructor, the organic juice bar opening in town, and how she thought the living room could use more light, maybe take down those heavy old curtains. Daniel laughed at her jokes. He always laughed, even when she wasn't funny. He had that glazed-over look, the one I'd seen on men who thought they were in love but were really just under someone's thumb. I stirred my stew slowly. Do you remember the stamp collection your grandfather gave your father? I asked Daniel casually. He paused, mid-spoonful. Yeah, the one in the study, right? Savannah didn't miss a beat. Oh, those old things. Are they worth anything? Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked up at me with the slightest glint, too fast for Daniel to catch, but not for me. I smiled softly. More sentimental than anything else, but some things can't be replaced. Daniel shrugged and went back to eating. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark study, behind the old oak desk, thinking. I'd seen it before. Not the theft itself, but the steps leading up to it. The slow manipulation, the insertion of control, the isolating of the target. It was what con artists did, but Savannah wasn't just after money. She wanted the whole legacy. The house, the history, the illusion of belonging to something she hadn't built. The next morning, I made cinnamon rolls from scratch, Daniel's favorite. The scent of warm sugar and spice filled the kitchen, just like it used to when he was little. I wanted one more morning where things felt normal, or at least, where he might remember what normal used to feel like. He came downstairs in sweatpants, rubbing his eyes, and smiled when he saw the tray. Mom, you didn't have to. I wanted to, I said simply, placing a plate in front of him. Sit, eat. Savannah appeared moments later, fully dressed, makeup already done. She looked from the rolls to me with an unreadable expression. Smells like a bakery in here, she said, reaching for a piece. There for Daniel, I replied, gently but firmly, though I suppose there's enough for everyone. She raised an eyebrow, then took a bite anyway. As they ate, I studied their faces. Daniel was relaxed. Savannah was calculating. I could see the wheels turning. She was always 5 steps ahead. Of him, of me, of anything in her way. I've been thinking, I said after a pause, keeping my voice light. It might be time to get some things in order, you know? Estate planning, inventory, all that fun stuff. Daniel nodded between bites. Yeah, that makes sense. Savannah froze for a fraction of a second. Oh? Something wrong? Not at all, I said. But it's wise to be prepared. Besides, this house has a lot of history, a lot of value. Her smile was polite but tight. Of course, it's a beautiful home. I met her gaze. It's more than a home, it's a legacy. That evening, after they left to visit friends in town, I retrieved a small fireproof safe from the back of my closet. Inside were documents Robert and I had kept safe for decades. Titles, insurance papers, and a revised will I'd updated privately a few months after Savannah and Daniel got married. I read through it slowly, carefully. Everything was in order. Almost everything. There was one thing I hadn't finalized. The clause about the house. Initially, it was supposed to go to Daniel. It made sense back then. He grew up here. He loved it here. But things had changed. And while I still loved my son, I no longer trusted the person he had become under Savannah's influence. Or maybe I didn't trust who he allowed himself to become when she was around. I closed the safe, but I didn't return it to the closet. Instead, I took it with me to the bedroom and placed it under my bed. That night, I dreamed of Robert. We were young again, sitting on the back porch, drinking lemonade in the summer heat. He turned to me, smiling in that way he always did when he knew something I didn't. Don't let them take what we built, he whispered. When I woke, there were tears on my cheeks, and the early morning light was just beginning to fill the room. The days that followed were filled with small, deliberate gestures from Savannah, the kind that might seem harmless to an outsider, but to me carried sharp edges. She moved an heirloom vase from the hallway table and replaced it with a bland modern sculpture. She accidentally donated 2 of Robert's vintage coats during a closet clean-out. She began making suggestions about updating the kitchen, knocking out walls, changing the cabinetry, replacing the stove I'd used for decades. Each time, Daniel agreed with her, not out of malice, out of blindness. And each time, I bit my tongue because I wasn't ready to play my hand. Not yet. Then came the evening that changed everything. I was upstairs, brushing my hair, when I heard the study door creak open downstairs. The door that was always closed unless I opened it. I moved silently into the hallway, barefoot on the hardwood, and peered over the banister. Savannah, alone, in the study. She was standing over my desk, rifling through drawers, quickly, methodically. She didn't hear me come down the stairs, didn't see me watching from the doorway, but I saw her, and I saw what she took. A small velvet pouch tucked into the back of the drawer, the one that held a few of the rarest stamps. Not all of them. Just enough that I might not notice for a while. She slipped it into her purse and walked out, as calm as if she'd only gone in to grab a pen. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't mention the missing pouch. Instead, I waited. And the next morning, I called my lawyer. His name was Graham Whittaker, a kind and discreet man who had handled our affairs for years. I told him it was urgent, and he agreed to come by the house that afternoon. When he arrived, Savannah was out again, her daily ritual of spin class and overpriced lattes. Daniel was in the backyard, distracted by a phone call. Graham and I sat in the sunroom, a place Savannah never cared to visit. Too dated, she once said. I need to make some changes, I told him. He gave a slow nod, sensing the weight behind my voice. To the will? To everything. He took out a folder and a pen, and I began listing exactly what I wanted. The house, to be transferred into a trust, with strict conditions. The antiques, catalogued and protected. The stamp collection, officially appraised and insured. And a new clause in the will. Under no circumstances was Savannah Carter to inherit a single item from my estate. Graham didn't blink. He'd seen families unravel over less. When he left, I felt lighter, but also sharper, more awake. I wasn't a fool, and I wasn't about to let someone rewrite the ending of the life Robert and I had built with such care, not without a fight. The following weekend, we hosted a small family dinner. Just Daniel, Savannah, and my niece Lena, who was visiting from Boston. I'd always been close with Lena. She reminded me of myself at her age. Sharp, curious, observant. Savannah was all charm, of course, complimenting Lena's earrings, asking about her job, gushing over the roast I'd made as if she hadn't mocked my cooking just the week before. But I wasn't paying attention to Savannah's words. I was watching her eyes. They kept flicking toward the sideboard, the one with the small drawer that held my jewelry box. I hadn't opened it in months, but that morning I had. And I had taken out 3 pieces, not to wear, but to count, to confirm. 2 were missing. I said nothing during dinner, but afterward, when Lena and I were alone in the kitchen washing dishes, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "Is everything okay, Aunt Evelyn? She's intense." I smiled softly. That's one word for it. "She doesn't like me," Lena said simply. "She's pretending, but I can tell." I placed a hand on hers. "You're a smart girl. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." That night, I double-locked the study door, and for the first time, I moved a small camera into the corner of the bookshelf, just in case. 3 days later, the footage confirmed everything. I waited until the house was empty. Savannah had gone to her self-care spa day, and Daniel was at work. Then I connected the camera to my laptop and watched. There she was, entering the study with confident, quiet steps. No hesitation. She went straight for the drawer beneath the bookshelf, opened it, pulled out the small jewelry case, slipped 2 rings and a bracelet into her bag. Then, just as quickly, she closed it, wiped the drawer's handle with a tissue, and walked out. Clean, controlled, practiced. She hadn't come looking. She knew exactly where everything was. I sat back in my chair, heart heavy, but no longer uncertain. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was theft, premeditated. And worse, it meant that somewhere along the way, my son had either turned a blind eye or helped her. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just pressed save and copied the footage onto a flash drive. I'd been raised to believe that family was sacred, that blood was thicker than anything, but that belief had died with Robert. And what stood in its place was something clearer, colder, but stronger. Family isn't who shares your name. It's who protects it. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Warm scones, fresh jam, hot tea, the little rituals I'd clung to long before Savannah ever entered our lives. Daniel joined me first, still yawning, still unaware. "Smells amazing," he said, pecking me on the cheek. Savannah came in moments later, radiant in a silk robe she hadn't owned a month ago. I recognized the fabric. It had belonged to my mother. She took a seat across from me, folding her hands neatly. "Evelyn, she said sweetly. Daniel and I have been talking. We think it's time you considered downsizing. I looked up from my teacup, silent. You know, she continued, less space to maintain, fewer stairs, more manageable. There's a beautiful retirement community just outside of town. No, I said. She blinked. I'm sorry? I said no. Daniel glanced between us, confused. Mom, it's just a suggestion. You'd have more help, people around. I have people around, I interrupted, calm and clear. They're just not the ones trying to steal my life out from under me. Savannah's expression twitched, just slightly. Daniel looked stunned. What are you talking about? I reached into the drawer beside me and placed the flash drive on the table. This, I said quietly, is what I'm talking about. Daniel stared at the flash drive like it was something foreign, something dangerous. Savannah, to her credit, didn't flinch. What is that? Daniel asked, his voice already rising with panic. Footage, I replied calmly. From the study. From the night Savannah decided to help herself to family heirlooms. He turned to her. What is she talking about? Savannah smiled, a thin, practiced smile. She's confused? Evelyn, you must have misplaced those things. You're getting older and... Finish that sentence, I warned, my voice low, and I swear to you, you'll regret it. For a moment, everything was still. Daniel pushed back from the table. You think Savannah stole from you? I don't think, I said, tapping the flash drive with one finger. I know. He looked at his wife, his mouth opening, closing, caught in that terrible space between belief and denial. Savannah stood slowly. I won't be insulted like this. Daniel, we're leaving. No, I said, and now my voice was like iron. You're leaving. Alone. She tilted her head. Excuse me? I stood too, meeting her gaze directly. This is my house, and it will never, ever be yours. Savannah's eyes narrowed, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the fury underneath. You think you can just throw me out? She hissed. I don't think, I said evenly. I can, and I have. She laughed, sharp and cold. Daniel won't let that happen. I turned to my son. Daniel, you have a choice. You can stay, and we'll talk this through like mother and son. Or you can leave with her. But if you walk out that door now, don't expect to walk back in. He looked torn, genuinely torn, but not surprised. Somewhere deep down, I think he'd always known who she really was. He opened his mouth to speak, but Savannah grabbed his arm. We're done here. No, I said. You are. I pulled out my phone and pressed a button. Moments later, Graham, my lawyer, stepped through the side door. I'd asked him to wait outside, just in case. I suggest you hand over the jewelry, he said politely, before we get law enforcement involved. Savannah's face turned pale. She hesitated, then slowly pulled a small velvet pouch from her bag and tossed it onto the table. No apology, no shame, just fury. She turned to Daniel. Are you seriously going to let her do this? He didn't answer, and in that silence, she knew she'd lost. Savannah stormed out without another word. The screen door slammed behind her, and for a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the ticking of the old wall clock above the stove. Daniel sat back down slowly, looking like someone who'd just woken up in a place he didn't recognize. Mom, he began, but I raised a hand. I don't want excuses. I don't want apologies. He looked down, ashamed. I didn't know. I believe you, I said gently. But you didn't want to know either. That's just as dangerous. He nodded, eyes glassy. I let her. Change me. No, I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. You let her make you forget who you were. But it's not too late to remember. We sat in silence for a while. The tea had gone cold, the scones uneaten. Finally, he asked, What happens now? That depends on you, I said. She's gone, for good. But if you want to stay, if you want to rebuild what we lost, the door is open, on my terms. He looked me in the eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my son again. Not the man molded by manipulation, but the boy who used to sit on this porch with me, eating cinnamon rolls and dreaming out loud. I'd like that, he said quietly. I really would. The weeks that followed were quieter, peaceful even. Daniel stayed. He helped around the house, cooked with me, repaired the loose fence boards Robert had always meant to get to. He He even joined me on my morning walks, like he used to when he was a teenager, and we'd talk about nothing and everything. We didn't speak much about Savannah. Eventually, the divorce papers came, clean, straightforward, without contest. She'd taken a few designer bags and her silence, nothing more. I suspected she'd moved on to her next target. Predators don't rest. They relocate. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Graham finalized the trust. Lena helped me catalog every heirloom, every document, every piece of our family history. And one quiet afternoon, I placed the revised will into the fireproof safe for the last time. I didn't feel angry or bitter. I felt free. Sometimes legacy isn't just about what you leave behind. It's about who you protect it from. I had almost lost everything, but I remembered who I was. And now, so did my son.